All right, you're good.
Okay, all right. Well, today I want to go further on connecting the dots. One of the things that Jan, told me last night after, last night's discussion, that I needed to connect the dots a little bit better. Where I was referring to, this serpent and such, both the Older Testament and the Newer Testament. And again, the same word being used there in the Garden of Eden, and even used in the description of Dan, this, raising up the serpent, Moses did, the brazen serpent, and such. And then picking up with, in the Newer Testament, the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees. And there's a connection through all of that. So, a dot connection is, there has always been this competition with the Lord's way. And there is a false way and his way. And the serpent is really good at getting close imitations. And we see in history many different examples where his false replacement system is put in place, and I think it's really to not only control mankind, but to divert mankind away from the Lord. Get us off of his path. And there are so many different examples of this. And when it really comes down to it, there should not be anything in the way of the Lord, Yah's communication directly with you. There should not be a man system that has your eyes diverted from him. You should be taking your issues directly to him and not through anyone else. So this connecting the dots is to have a straight line communication where there are no even dots. It's a straight line to him. So I'm going to talk about these adversaries. Even in, I talked about last night, the adversaries in the rebuilding of the temple. And you would think, there are other people who want to help. And they said, no, this is our job. Because the adversary wants to come in along and to be involved. Because with more and more involvement, you can steer off more and more of a tangent as a result of not only being involved, but very quickly, though the adversary finds itself at the head and organizing many of these different things. So that was one of the things with First Ezra, and the people said no, and instantly when they said no, their adversaries went about, seeing what other ways they can shut them down. Go through the authorities and such to get the Lord's work shut down. Now, I'm jumping a little bit ahead with this slide here, but if you look at Jerusalem or Israel, who are they surrounded by? These different ones that are named here, who are they surrounded by? I can think of one word. their enemies. They're surrounded by their enemies. And you know, I don't know if you can read this, but you know, even down here, we've got you know, Philistia and Amalek. It's interesting that the word Nephilim is connected with those tribes. Very interesting. What were the Israelites commanded to do with the inhabitants of Canaan before they came in? What were they supposed to do?
Kill them, wipe them out.
And on the surface, that appears to be, why would the Lord tell them to wipe out, you know, dad, mom, and kids of these nations?
Well, in retrospect, we're able to see that by not doing what they were told,
Mm-hmm.
it led to a whole group entity that exists today, that has existed for a long time, and the Ottomans or
Yep.
what it evolved to, that has just rained chaos on the planet
Yeah. Yep.
because they didn't finish the job.
And it's interesting that in Daniel chapter 2, it talks about this, you know, this statue. And what I find interesting is not the head of gold. What I find interesting is the feet and the mixing of seed. And it uses the word seed there, which makes me wonder, does this tie back to Nephilim and mixing of seed? And it says it would not truly, purely mix. And even what we're doing today with playing God, so to speak, with genetics of people, I get uneasy with that. And I wonder, well, all the things that they're playing with now, if they're beginning to, as in the days of Noah, we're beginning to approach those same type of things. So, it's a question, and I have lots of questions. All right, let's see. Now, this is something that from last night that I went over, but I wanted to review it again. In Acts 2:36, it says, "Therefore let all the house of Israel know assuredly that God hath made that same Jesus whom ye have crucified, both Lord and Christ." The enemy loves to come in to kill, destroy, and eliminate. It's one of their characteristics. Again, if you study, it's always good to study who your enemy is. Know who your enemy is, and what are their characteristics. One of the things I see just in our film industry, death, and death seems to be the center of much of what is, it's not anything for one movie to have over 1,000 people being killed, slaughtered. They make very light of life. Again, that's an evidence of a characteristic. And I think we need to be character judges and evaluate what do you tend to see from certain people types, certain groups, certain industries, our news media. How many times do you see an encouraging news, subject? I can remember being a kid, you would see more hero stories. You would see more encouraging reports. How much do you see of that now from our news media? And now we've got 24 hours a day. Before you had a half-hour segment that, each day. Now they got 24 hours a day. And again, what is the character of that? Does it build you up or does it put you in fear? All right, and if we look at Philippians 4:8, what are we encouraged to be focusing on? What are we pouring into our hearts? What is the enemy trying to pour into your heart? And in verse 40 it says, and with many other words did he testify and exhort, saying, save yourself from this. Now, remember I mentioned yesterday untoward, and I thought that was kind of an unusual word, untoward generation. Well, this morning I went and looked a little bit further what exactly that word is. And the untoward is, coming from Strong's Concordance, you see here, warped. What's like a winding? That can be described like a snake, as an example. Perverse, crooked. And often you see it, come out as translated as forward, untoward, and crooked. So again, coming back here. So Peter is encouraging them to save themselves from what kind of generation?
The wicked generation.
And this is in the Messiah's time. What type of generation do we live in?
Untoward.
Definitely.
In those times, evil shall be called good and good shall be called evil.
You got it. Exactly. So also going back to this word serpent that I talked about. And so this tying together all of this I was talking about last night, again, a description. And this serpent and the serpent's way. How does the serpent capture its prey?
It wraps around it.
That's correct. Sneaks up on it in stealth. Often, the prey doesn't even know it's around. Doesn't know it has an enemy in its presence. That's how a serpent works. So, studying their characteristics, looking at religion, and I say religion as opposed to a personal relationship with the Father, and I make a distinction between the two. Can you tell when you walk in somebody else's presence that has a personal relationship with the Father? Yeah. And those who just are having a religious experience. Is there a difference?
Oh yeah, big difference.
Shows in their life.
Yeah, that's correct. It's in your countenance.
Yeah, the fruit that they produce.
Fruit examiners, exactly. Looking at their characteristics, what do they produce? Not what the words they say, but what does their actions over time produce? So if you look at the Jewish religion itself, and it's interesting, the different phases that it went through. One, they struggled to get Egypt out of their hearts, even in the Exodus. They also very much struggled to get Babylon out of their hearts after they came back, for those who did come back from the Babylonian captivity. And actually, the Father didn't intervene with nearly as much action, removing Babylon out of the hearts as much as he was involved in removing Egypt the hearts.
Still have remnants, many remnants today in the Jewish practices that came from Babylon.
Correct. The mysticism, Kabbalah, you know.
Go into the basic of how they enter Shabbat with the candle lighting.
Mhm.
It is came right out of Babylon.
Yeah.
It is not a scriptural instruction, it's not something the Father said, do this. It got so ingrained in their day-to-day that it just carried forward thousands and thousands of years to today.
Because when they were in Babylon, they basically, as I understand it, as a group, forgot the commandments. That was really removed from them. So when they come back, and again, Ezra, Nehemiah, you know, and they're, you know, Ezra's, you know, ready to pull, you know, his hair out. And what they have done, you know, they have intermingled themselves with the people that they were supposed to destroy. They were supposed to wipe out. And here they're married to them. You know, but also this struggle, you know, the Zadokite priesthood stepped back in to do as they were commanded to do. But actually, there was built-in opposition to that Zadokite priesthood and the method that they were doing. And you had others who wanted a different religion, wanted different rules. And eventually, with the Greeks coming in and kicking the Zadokite priesthood down, and actually even with the Maccabean revolt, and the Zadokite priesthood, you know, wanted to come back in, and they were not allowed back in to take their rightful position. A new religion basically started with new rules and a different way than Yahuwah's way, God's way. So, and you begin to see man's, you know, rules, man's laws, the oral laws, all these things being added that they were commanded not to add a single word to, and not to take anything from. You begin to see all of that, you know, the Kabbalah being, and the Talmud and other things. And in fact, even after the Messiah's time, what they call the sages, which later became the rabbis, they were saying by Rabbi Akiva's time, the sacrifices, the priestly sacrifices are no longer required. We have the word. You know, we have the scriptures, and even if we pick the wrong calendar, wrong dates for our feasts and such, God has ordained us and blesses it. They were that strong to come out and say that.
Different than what Catholicism did.
Exactly. So this became a new religion, and it's really the rabbinic religion we have today has its roots in all that. Now we want to say, well, the Christian church is different.
Yeah.
No, they're not.
Not even close.
They're cousins to each other, especially through what happened through the Catholic Church, what happened under Emperor Hadrian before even Constantine. And what happened with Rome? Rome had a difficulty, and they had way too many different religions. With all these different religions, it's much more difficult to control the people. It was in their best interest to form one religion that controls them all. It's almost like the Lord of the Rings. They made all those rings and one ring to control them all. And it's interesting that up until the first meeting of all of the different the bishops of these churches that Constantine had come in, that up until that point, the scriptures were being translated in many different languages. Again, watch the characteristics, their action over time. What happened after they formed that council? What happened the next 200 years? And the distribution of the scriptures. We see that the scriptures actually were taken from the people. The Roman Catholic Church said, we are now the holders of the scripture. We're the ones who we're the only ones who can translate it and tell you what it says. Again, to control mankind is the end result of that. And to remove this personal relationship between Yah and you. So both of them I see, whether it's the Jewish religion or the Catholic Church religion, they have the same ultimate objective. They're not really they're cousins to each other in their operation. And in fact, there is as much pagan practices, if you want to say, with each of them. Now, it's interesting, this, I know the Sefer was being referred to, and Stephen Pigeon was really behind that. But this is something that I got from one of his YouTube videos. And if anything I do too much of is watch YouTube videos. And come across a lot of different things by doing such. But it's interesting that it talks about this last point, when the Maccabees would be the house of Hyrcaniah, John Hyrcanius converting the house of Esau and Edom to newly formed Judaism. So with this conversion that happened when the Zadokite priesthood was kicked out, and you saw the Hasmonean dynasty, which King Herod, he was half what and half what? You remember?
Esau, I know that.
Correct. Half Edomite
Yeah.
and half Jewish. Again, the mixing of the two together. But the Maccabees were very involved with bringing Esau or the Edomites into the house of, if you want to call it, Judah.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the house of Judah at this point is when I begin to call it a Jewish house rather than the house of Judah. And I make a distinction between the two.
Jewish being a religion?
That's correct. And a marriage with others, they have no being married to. They just have brought unto themselves corruption. You brought in a serpent system, is what you have done. And especially with bringing in Esau with this. It's interesting that, and I'm sorry I forgot where I clipped this from, because I'm trying to, reference where I'm getting my sources. And one of the things I do, and here you're going to see some slides from the God culture. So I'm using some of their material also in this, but I've forgotten where I got this from. But the First Council of
Nicaea.
Nicaea, thank you, and the missing records. It says the Council of Nicaea, Christianity was born. When you think of Christianity, it was born before that. And this is claiming that it actually was born with this council. Responsible for commencement of a new religion and a theological creation of Jesus Christ. Now, understand here, I often use the word Messiah because we have a mixed definition of Jesus Christ. I think there are times when Jesus Christ is being used correctly. And there are other times Jesus Christ is being, referred to by a different religion than what the Messiah brought to us. As an example, when people say, well, the law was nailed to the cross, it no longer applies. Now again, I would say, if you're talking about the Talmudic, I would agree with that.
Well, and
But
via proper translation, that's what it actually says.
there you go. But that's not how it's,
That's not how it's
Applied.
understood today.
that's correct.
If I could,
Yes.
got very good friends that are Catholic. And over the years, our influence, they left the Roman Catholic Church and have changed to a Catholic church that has no ties to the Pope or Rome and is on a pre-Vatican II standard,
Mm-hmm.
for those that understand
Right.
what that means. The roadblock that we came up against to get them to fully walk away from the Catholic Church was that from childhood, as part of their, say your Hail Marys,
Catechism.
and in reading the scripture where the angel came to Mary and explained to her who she was pregnant with. In English, whether you're dealing with King James or probably 99% of the English translations, they're using the Old English, where the angel starts by saying, Hail Mary. Well, we've even lost touch with English. We don't speak English from Great Britain. Hail, in their mind, is Hail to the King, means bow your knee, worship, this is the righteous one. And so their position is, if you've got an angel saying, Hail Mary, their angels are elevating Mary above themselves, which is why they pray to Mary for intercession. But if you go back and look at that verse, and even go to the King James Version, where it references back to the Septuagint Greek word that was used, and I did this with him, I said, I've never heard this before. Let's look it up and do a word study. The hail, when you go to the Greek, King James plus, where it's got the concordance, Strong's, is greetings. Hail, stranger! That doesn't mean I'm worshiping them. It is the Old English greeting. And because King James was written in Old English, all that angel was saying was, Greetings, Mary!
Mm-hmm.
And yet, through a lifetime of brainwashing, they've turned it into a worship statement And so when I showed him that, and I had no idea what we were gonna find.
Mm.
So for me, it was just another
Confirmation.
nail in the coffin, you know, just more confirmation. But for him, it created a brain shutdown. It was, it hit the cognitive dissonance.
Right.
And he's one of these men that's just like us, that can get into a theological, worldly discussion and look at all the angles and really think things through. But when it hit this one area, his brain just shut off. It couldn't
Process.
comprehend that the lie was that big.
Right.
And that's one little word that they've been able, they've distorted the picture so hugely just based on the misunderstanding of a language that we supposedly speak.
Mm-hmm. So this is, you know, one of the points I'm getting to is here both this Jewish religion and this Catholic Church religion has told us these are the scriptures. This is all you're allowed to look at. And I don't trust either one of them to do that, make that decision for me. And as I mentioned last night, yes, you gotta be careful because there's a lot of Gnostic gospels and other things, you know, but at the same time, don't allow either one of these groups to determine who and what the scriptures are, or yes.
So would you clarify for me in my brain,
Yep.
what is this God culture? Because I heard you talk about it last night, but I have no clue of what you're talking about.
It's a YouTube you know, group that comes up with some really interesting studies.
Okay.
And it's kind of funny, I can listen to them for a while, but there is also a bit of an attitude that kind of comes through that I have to kind of put it away for a side for a while, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
But I find some really thought-provoking things to further research and look into
Okay.
that I consider. So it's a reference, you know, for instance, when I was wanting to, you know, driving down the road, I want to hear some more things about second estrus, or jubilees. You know, they've done a lot of things that, well, they'll take second estrus and make a whole year study out of it, you know,
Okay.
as an example. So for me, it's thought producing. Now, there are some slides there that I'm using in this presentation. So I want to give credit where credit's due.
Okay.
So that's the reason I'm mentioning them, because,
Am I also hearing from you that on occasion, there's mixed seed involved in what they talk about?
definitely,
So
take it.
if you're gonna look into this group, you gotta go into it with armor on.
Yes, you have to be, you know, aware that, like most other things, that there is truth mixed with things that are not, you know, true. But I find they do a lot of good research. I see some value in some of the research that they do.
Okay.
So that being said, but as I said, if I'm going to be using the material, I've got to say where it came from. So I'm not necessarily saying I fully endorse them. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is yes.
Isn't the Apocrypha in the Catholic Bible?
Yes, it is, and it's in the KJV 1611, the Apocrypha.
Right, so
Now
it's
there's
taken out by,
publishers, but, you know,
It was in the 1611, but it was not in the, what was the year that the mass production started of the official King James?
yeah, there was
1625?
I know that the Puritans didn't have it in their Bible.
Right.
And you had different groups, but it seemed like it was about, depending between the American and the British, it seemed like it went completely out of everybody's except for what was quote unquote now the Catholic Bible.
It's also in the Greek Orthodox, isn't it?
It's still in many different other groups, but as far as the general production, it was about 1885 and 1895.
But the 1611, even has a much closer rendition to the Messiah's name. It has the Jesus,
That's correct.
which is because the J at that point still hadn't been adopted by most languages.
It was not until it appears to be the Jesuit Catholic group that was really pushing, that's when the J,
They actually reference it on the Bible.
Yep, that's correct, yeah, exactly. So, when, it seemed like there was a date.
Said in the 16th century there. So.
Yeah, okay, yep, and that's about,
It wasn't, I'm thinking 1625, and that's going back, it wasn't much after the 1611
right.
that they did the revision, where the J got put in and the other books got pulled out.
And it's really interesting in our current canon, how much the J is just all over lots of names, as far as the first letter, and such, So, and it's interesting here that Constantine did unite, I guess, both the Druids and also the Far Eastern empires and their deities into this one deity that they now are calling Jesus Christ. So they merged two, and the Roman governments would do that. They would create these, these government-sanctioned gods, if you want to call it that. So this was a government-sanctioned God. And now, I'm not saying that the Messiah is not who he is. It's not taking anything away from the Messiah. But it's interesting, this, it talks about this vote. Here, there was 157 that voted out of 161 that were there for this change. Now, what it doesn't say here is what happened. I think it was either the night before or it was 3 days before. I'm not sure. It may have been the night or the day before. But there were 15 other holdouts. And this is where Constantine kind of let them, work amongst themselves between these different religious leaders, exactly what this one nation religion was going to be. But towards the end, there were, I think, 18 or 19 holdouts that would not agree to this one nation religion. So Constantine says, okay guys, you either change your vote or I will exile you from my kingdom. So overnight, 15 of them changed their vote. And there were only 3 or 4 who still said no. And they were exiled, and Constantine exiled them.
Are you going to get into the next steps that we're taking at the Council of Laodicea in this?
Yeah, they're, I'm picking which changes I'm gonna go down.
Okay.
And there were many, I will speak to this, that now, again, studying a group's characteristics, what did this group take on against who their competitors were? And I would say more specifically followers of the way. They imprisoned them, they persecuted them, they martyred them. That is, and again, the Jewish religion did the same thing. Anybody that was their competitor. But in practice, Catholicism and the Jewish religion are not necessarily competitors with each other. They still have the same serpent religion as their backbone. So they're not in opposition with each other. Now, I've been taking a long time getting to more detail on second Esdras and Jubilees and the Didache, as I plan on talking about, but I kind of felt like this is important foundational in looking at it and considering other things as being scripture. And that determination of what scripture is, I think is important for each of you to come to that, your own interpretation of that. And go to the Father, with it, okay? For me personally, I put a lot of credence in what was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm not saying that what we have published today is all that was in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I make a distinction between the two. But the Dead Sea Scrolls are as far back as I can reach back in time. And I can't get further back than that. So I put some extra weight on what's found there as being considered as being scripture, but also I make even a differentiation there. I am finding it's important to look at what cave each of those things came out of. Because there are caves that it seems to be, okay, these were documents that, were considered, say, temple scrolls. They seem to have more weight. But there are also, I think, a couple caves that it seems like,
They kept it as historical reference, but not as scripture.
correct, yes. They wanted to know about other systems out there. So there's a difference between having Wikipedia, say, and knowing other things, from other groups, and be knowledgeable even of your enemy. So I think it's important to know which cave some of these things came out of to make a differentiation. So in the second Esdras, if we look at chapter 7, 16 through the first part of verse 29, it says, "Why hast thou not considered in thy mind this thing that is to come, rather than that which is present?" So I thought that was interesting. Well, why are you not thinking about the things that are to come? And for instance, even looking at prophecy. Again, prophecy is a good thing. So into studying. Then answered I and said, O Lord, thou bearest rule. Thou hast ordained thy law in thy law that the righteous should inherit to these things, but that the ungodly should perish. Nevertheless, the righteous shall suffer straight things, and hope for why? For they that have done wickedly have suffered these straight things, and yet shall not see the why. And he said unto me, There is no judge above God, and none that hath understanding above the highest. For there be many that perish in this life, because they despise the law of God that is set before them. For God hath given straight commandment to such as came, what they should do to live, even as they came, and what they should observe to avoid punishment. Nevertheless, they were not obedient unto him, but spake against him, and imagined vain things, and deceived themselves by their wicked deeds, and said of the Most High that he is not, and knew not his ways. But his law have they despised, and denied his covenants. In his statutes have they not been faithful, and have not performed his works. And therefore, Esdras, for the empty are empty things, and for the full are the full things. Behold, the time shall come that these tokens which I have told thee shall come to pass, and the bride shall appear, and she coming forth shall be seen, that now it is withdrawn from the earth. And whosoever is delivered from the foresaid evils shall see my wonders. For my Son Jesus shall be revealed with those that be with him. And they that remain shall rejoice within 400 years. After these years shall my Son Christ die. And almost exactly as I understand it, 400 years later, the Messiah died. Again, predicted 400 years before.
So that's the years between the last of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. Is that the 400-year?
In our current quote, canon.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Even though there were many other writings that happened and are even recorded in the Dead Sea Scrolls during that period of time.
Oh wow.
But there was a shut-off that happened in what the Jews considered being Scripture.
Mm-hmm.
And they no longer accepted this competing group of Zadokites writings as being legitimate, because they viewed the Zadokite priesthood, that as I understand it was operating out of Qumran, as being a competitive system that could bring them down. So they were obviously trying to shut them down in anything that came from that group, any of their scriptures. Now, also, it's interesting, again, why would Second Esdras be looked at being removed? And it talks about, even that the apostles and disciples were using the scriptures to show who the Messiah is. And I think the Jews went about removing those evidences. And here, they tried, and I think Second Esdras is one of those things that, that it was part of that. But here in this verse it says, and the time shall be when these things shall come to pass, and the signs shall happen when I showed thee before, and then shall my Son be declared, whom thou sawest as a man ascending. And Yeshua confessed to the world. So he answered and said unto me, it is the Son of God, whom they have confessed in the world. Then began I greatly to commend them that stood so stiffly for the name of the Lord. Mass resurrection is talked about here. And the earth shall restore those that are asleep in her. And so shall the dust those that dwell in silence. And the secret places shall deliver those souls that were committed unto them. Evil will disappear, as proclaimed. And the Most High shall appear upon the seat of judgment, and misery shall pass away, and the long suffering shall have an end. But judgment only shall remain. Truth shall stand, and faith shall wax strong. And the work shall follow, and the reward shall be showed, and the good deeds shall be of force, and wicked deeds shall bear no rule. So I think wicked deeds bear rule these days.
Yes.
Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to probably,
You need to run over it a little bit, so.
okay, all right. I may cover some of this tomorrow, because I think I'm still, got a fair amount to cover even today. But it's exciting. Let me talk about both of these chapters, at least, high level instead of reading through them. What Esdras goes about doing is explaining in more detail Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7, and more explicitly, the fourth beast is what he really delves into. And it talks about this eagle and these feathers, and really these feathers are different kingdoms that come and go. But what you got to realize, these are all feathers of one bird. So these different kingdoms that rise up and fall, and these different things, it's almost like a shuffling, of that's going on. You got one shuffler. You've got this serpent that's behind all of these different nations that rise and fall, but it's the same system. For instance, if you want to call it the same secret Babylonian system that follows through, even in this same statute in Daniel chapter 2, it's the same statute, even though different kingdoms are quote unquote the face of the statue at different times. Still, the way it operates, if you look at the Medo-Persian Empire, when it came over and took over the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persians really didn't change the way the empire worked. They were just the new mafia lords of the system. Same thing, when Alexander the Great came through and took over the Medo-Persian Empire. I mean, sometimes they were still using their same currency, the coinage. They didn't even change the coinage. They still operated by the same characteristics. When the Romans came in, same thing. When the Byzantine Empire, took over, again, they're operating, they're the new mafia that has taken over, but it's the same economic operation, the same taxation, and even after the Byzantine Empire, if you look at the British Empire operated as the new mafia in town. And if you look at how many American military bases that have been throughout the whole world, it doesn't appear that different to me.
I want you to go through your fourth piece thing, but I want to do a preface.
Go ahead. Yes.
You look at this nation's history and with what the media puts out there and the agendites, we're all bad. All our forefathers are bad, and we're evil, and we took the land from the Indians, blah, blah, blah. You sit down and have a talk with Jesse, and he's going to tell you, as a very Yah-fearing, righteous man, that in his opinion, the Native Americans were judged and punished by the Father.
Correct.
Through the people that came over.
Correct.
So, what happened to the Native Americans was not evil people did this to them. It was a judgment by the Father. The peoples of this nation Puritans. And very little of this is taught. We're taught the 200 years, we're now approaching 250 of this nation's official existence. But you need to back up a step and say, well, there was a lot of time that there were a lot of people here before that. So for us that remember middle school, when was this nation founded?
1776.
Yes. When did the first people settle here?
It's Plymouth Rock.
Yes,
The
and
main
there's a
one.
little rhyme that we're taught about Columbus.
In 1892.
No.
1492.
Yeah.
Christopher Columbus.
So from 1492, we'll just round it off and say the year 1500, all the way up to 1776, we've got 270 years there. Then we've got the founding of the nation, and if you read, anybody takes the time to actually read our Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and understands the history of the founding, it was only a 2-vote difference as to whether this nation's language was going to be English versus Hebrew. And the principles that this nation were founded upon are very scriptural. The Puritans, in my opinion, were probably closer to the walk, the way that was being done by the apostles than we've even achieved at this point. I mean, you've got laws on the books in all of New England, the 13 colonies, outlawed Christmas, outlawed all these pagan things. And that wasn't just by accident. There was a force of people behind that. So we had 250 years, for the most part, of a righteous nation entity. And then from the founding of the nation up until a certain point, also served righteously in the name of the Father, even though they had the name wrong. The actions that were taken, the wars that were fought, are involving, I would say, even and up until World War II, despite some red flag adulterations, holding back and getting involved. It was through our getting involved that that evil was put down. Now, everything post-World War II has been a downhill road.
Right.
But, so we go back and start with 1500 and take us all the way up to 1944, World War II. Now you have 400 and close to 50 years of a righteous nation. And I believe that's why this nation was blessed. The people were blessed so much. But things started changing, have been changing, are changing, which will lead very likely into this becoming what you're talking about. Fort
Correct.
East.
I mean,